Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today it's a big one, the newest project from Eric Church, Evangeline versus the Machine. At this point, it's kind of obvious that Eric Church's ambitions are being short-circuited, maybe by his longtime producer, Jay Joyce, who might be a poor fit, or his reach just wildly exceeding his grasp and aiming for a sound that's less Nashville country, more a theatrical blend of heartland rock, southern soul, gospel, even some baroque prog rock with a few sidelong glances at similar genre blurring from Sturgill Simpson. Now, whether it's him getting long bored with the gristmill of Music Row, or his own music nerd instincts pulling him into increasingly strange rabbit holes, as a longtime fan, I'm now left in a similarly strange place. Mr. Misunderstood is one of the best mainstream country albums of the 2010s, and the And EP is a hidden gem to this day and from 2021, and I'm not against him taking bigger risks, but if it's done at the expense of strong individual hooks or grooves, or an album's thematic cohesion, it can get very inconsistent and frustrating. So the mixed reviews for Evangeline versus the Machine, which was ending with a Tom Waits cover of all things, had me kinda concerned where this was going, especially after the single Hands of Time had a lot of production issues, and that proved to be a very justified concern, because not since The Outsiders have we gotten an Eric Church project this messy. And you know what, let's not waste time. If Jay Joyce was a problem before, he's the biggest problem now, where at its core, this is an issue of texture. Eric Church is not the strongest singer on record, we'll come back to this, so if you want to go for a southern fried blues, gospel, soul fusion with grandiose strings, woodwinds, and horns, it's a very tricky balance ensuring that Eric Church doesn't get swallowed up by the mix. That's what happened on Hands of Time. But you'd also hope that it's earthy and rough around the edges, has the texture to sound more organic, the grooves roiling and sinuous. And in theory, Jay Joyce would make a lot of sense for this. At his very best, he likes to split the difference between percussive bombast and very delicate atmospherics, and he has proven that he can deliver some subtlety. In the extended misty blends between tracks here, he proves he does just that. And for the most part, the guitars and pianos have some supple balance and real warmth. But in practice, the lockstep percussion is dictating any groove instead of the fatter, defined low-end bass line, and any ragged snarl has been crushed back in favor of glossy, over-polished opulence that will prioritize cinematic volume over what might fit more organically in the mix. Evangeline could have been one of the strongest moments on the album if the horns didn't sound so rigid around the cracking percussion, especially followed by the swampy swagger of Rocket's White Lincoln that quite frankly sounds like going through the motions, especially post Desperate Man or Heart and Soul. The contrast is probably most obvious with the choirs. Eric Church is trying to bring in this raw, bluesy drawl and leap up into his falsetto, arguably a lot more than he should, especially on Darkest Hour, but the choirs, they sound more imported from Broadway than the Delta, where the lower horns and organs sound pretty decent across the first half of the album, like on the cinematic swell of Bleed on Paper, and the slow burn restraint, well, part of it on Johnny, but sometimes the horns sound tinny or at the worst outright synthetic. Look at Hands of Time, or that ugly blaring across Darkest Hour leaping to mind again. And it's all the more true with the drums. I could reference Darkest Hour yet again, that song's a mess, but whoever told Jay Joyce that bringing in a cheap sounding drum machine to a cover of Clap Hands from Tom Waits that he himself contributes, that should not be allowed anywhere near a studio. Feels damn near like heresy to make a song that's sweaty and raw sound so shrink-wrapped. But again, texture would really do wonders to sell the whole vision instead of sounding this stiff and white bread and incongruous with itself. Yeah, it's doing more than you would usually hear on the average Music Row album, but let's have slightly higher standards than just satiating Nashville radio's narrow limits, and Eric Church should know and expect that by now, or at the very least not care as much given how deep into his career he is as an established veteran. And what's so maddening is not only did I bring up many of these exact same issues when I reviewed Heart and Soul 4 years ago, there are a lot fewer excuses across a more limited sample size with few hooks that can match the very best of Heart and Soul. You can tell the budget's on display here. It's only 8 songs, but they all sound really expensive. Eric Church is clearly putting in the effort to try to recreate that genre-blurring, soulful swell, where you would think that he might just include more songs to fully optimize the grandeur, but the overproduction has it sounding like the stage play version of itself, trying to overwhelm with flash rather than any grit or groove that might actually venture into dirtier, more transgressive territory away from Music Row curators, painting in such broad strokes where finer imperfections could have made this feel more authentic or special, or hell, just flatter Eric Church's voice a bit more. And at this point, as someone who's actually seen him live, I'm sorry, it's inexcusable. He is a better singer than he's often recorded to be, where he sounds weedy with this semi-live sounding mic pickup on record, and it neuters any credible holler or power that he has when he's not in his falsetto. And when he's clearly trying so goddamn hard, one can only wonder what might happen if you got a mix or producer that could flatter his voice. Dave Cobb, Shooter Jennings, hell, I'd settle for Dan Auerbach in a pinch. And that takes us to the lyrics. And on the one hand, thematically, I get what he's trying, with Evangeline as the avatar of the spiritual moving power of music in comparison with, well, the machine. Whereas a musician who's only getting older and reckoning with his own weaknesses, like his anger issues on Storm in My Blood, while still trying to play the game, I can see his draw to something seedier and rougher, more that inspires his imagination. But how far does he actually take it? I liked how Johnny retells The Devil Went Down to Georgia to reflect newfound darker times. I appreciated how much Bleed on Paper draws on old legends of Robert Johnson and the Devil at the Crossroads, and I don't mind Easter eggs referencing some classic music from decades past. It's some nice metatext that he's indulged in before. But here the references not only feel way more obvious, but also more for their own sake, rather than accentuating a more interesting or challenging arc, especially compared to the bigger swings in storytelling he took on Heart and Soul, or even The Outsiders, even if I don't think it worked. The fact this runs so short is also kind of jarring. With such opulence on display, why does this sound like a thematic arc he's hit before and better? And that's before I highlight how Darkest Hour is a pretty stock ballad originally pushed as a charity single, and Rocket's White Lincoln is a pretty standard hangout song that got put on the album at the last minute. You cut out those and the Tom Waits cover and just focus what's on theme, this could have been an EP. And not exactly a strong one at that. In short, I started off this review thinking that Eric Church's ambitions were getting short-circuited, his reach was exceeding his grasp, but Evangeline vs. the Machine shows that's only half the case in the production execution, because the other half is how this feels thinly sketched, undercooked, and kinda derivative of himself when you consider Eric Church's whole catalog, where the flash obscures, well, a less compelling project. Maybe the broad lack of greater acclaim for Heart and Soul, commercial or critical, left him less inspired to get as weird, take more chances, get messy, embrace creative swerves that could actually buck against the machine, especially as he says he left a bunch of great songs off this project in order to preserve the more theatrical vibe. So much of the press run for this album was highlighting the disposability and how art in the machine is treated, but how can that then reflect an album where your instrumentation and thematic choices never really challenge that system? He's as much of a music nerd as I am. He knows exactly how twisted he could have made this album based off of his own back catalog, especially if he's now covering Tom Waits. And yeah, that's the risk you run when referencing so many classics. Not only could I be listening to those songs instead, but it leaves this project feeling smaller and safer and more compromised, like the over-polished stage tribute, and it's less striking for it. And I often found myself thinking of that new Ryan Coogler movie Sinners, specifically the soundtrack that's so deeply rooted in old school blues and black gospel that nails the texture of which Eric Church understands and knows, and on songs like Bleed on Paper can still show off some of that historical knowledge. But this feels like the cloying, over-arranged tribute that doesn't have the grittier soul to manufacture that verisimilitude, made all the worse with the more personal, nerdy connections that made Mr. Misunderstood and the Andy P so special kind of get lost in all the production value along the way. That's not saying this is bad, but I gotta wonder, after previous big swings, EMI Nashville took a hatchet to this project in order to make it feel more streamlined and marketable, which might be why it feels so goddamn short and thematically underpowered, borderline incomplete. Or Eric Church was running short on ideas and decided to paint in broader strokes for more ornamentation to obscure a less compelling core, with Jay Joyce then fumbling the assist, at least to me. Either way, yeah, I'm sorry, I can only call this decent at best, with some pretty good songs but mishandling the stylism and leaving the rest kind of feeling undercooked. If you're an Eric Church fan, you've heard all of this done better, maybe it translates more live, but for everyone else, maybe worth a listen. But again, if you're actually going against the machine, let's have a little more rage behind it. All I'm saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. I know this is going to attract some backlash, especially from diehard Eric Church fans. Folks, I really wanted to love this. I've seen him live. The Andy P was one of my favorite projects of 2021. Mr. Misunderstood was one of my favorite projects of 2015. This does not measure up, and I really wish it did. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, if you all want to get projects on my schedule, or just yell at me on my Discord, or hell, support the channel, like, again, Patreon, YouTube memberships, the options are available. Once again, don't feel obligated. Tough times out there. The options available, though. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.